Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Marshall Hangout. This week we have Jaremey McMullin, who is is a lecturer at University of St Andrews and a 1999 Marshall Scholar, and has kindly agreed to do a hangout for me. I think I'm very lucky at how kind all our alumni have been for doing these things for me. I'm really excited to hear what he has to say. I think his topic is very interesting. I've been following him on Facebook and many of his films and things that he's been doing. So I think it will be a really interesting topic to hear about. Just to let you know, we're a small group. So when we get to the Q&A section, if you want to just stick your name in the chat, we'll call on you. You can unmute, put your camera on and ask a question directly. Okay, Jaremey, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Mary. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to hang out with I guess, some mostly current or future marshals, maybe some past and some other folks too. So yeah, definitely in the chat, let me know who you are and how you're affiliated. Just a couple of brief things about me. As Mary said, I predate Mary for one with the Marshall by a year or two, I think. I started at Queen's in Belfast. I did the master's in comparative and ethnic conflict. And then I moved to Oxford and was at Hartford College, where I did the master's in forced migration at the Refugee Studies Center there, and then transitioned to do my DPhil in international relations, where I eventually moved to New College, where I was a junior research fellow there. And from there, I took the job at St Andrews as a lecturer, and I'm now a senior lecturer there. So I am one of those scholars that just kind of stayed, and I've never regretted it. And it was a wonderful experience. So it's very special to be able to connect today and in any way in the future. I live in Edinburgh, even though I work in St Andrews. So that said, if any of you ever find yourselves in Edinburgh, please do get in touch and I'd love to show you around. Okay, so today what I've prepared is to introduce a little bit about a multi-year project that I've been doing. I'm just going to start sharing my slides, so bear with me while I pull those up. Okay. I think those are up. Excellent. And this is a multi-year project that comes from my main research interest, which is in war veterans and veteran transition back from conflict. So I have a project that looks at the United States, for example, and veteran-to-veteran attachment and association. But I also have this current and now 3 or 4 year long project that looks at ex-combatant and conflict-affected youth in Liberia, and specifically those who are affiliated with the commercial motorcycling sector. So in other words, they're motorcycle taxi drivers in Liberia. Like in Sierra Leone, like in DRC, like in a couple of other contexts, this sector was originated by ex-combatants and it still has a significant presence of ex-combatants. And since the war in Liberia ended in 2003, that means that the new generation of drivers now were mostly child soldiers during the war, or were what we would call conflict-affected youth, so they lost out on educational and economic opportunities because of the war. So what I thought I'd do today is kind of describe, how I came at this project and the kinds of things that it's spawned and the kinds of different outputs that I've tried to create around it and why I think that's important to do as researchers. I probably won't get into tons of details about every one of the impact generating activities that we've done in Liberia, so please do feel free to ask specific questions about those, including about the ethics, the ethical aspects, or just the how-to aspects of doing the research or getting the funding. I'm very happy to talk about that process also. So, briefly, I set out, well, I already understood because of previous research for the UN and academic research that I'd done that motorcycling was a site of peace building in Liberia, even if it wasn't always recognized as such. Importantly, because it wasn't always recognized as such. So with this project, I wanted to understand how and why motorcycling is a space of peace and peace building. How and why motorcyclists understand it as a place and a space of peace. Even if as a place and space of peace, it also poses challenges to writers themselves, to safety and security, conceptualized in a lot of different ways, and to peace itself. I also wanted to move beyond discussions about disarmament, demobilization, or reintegration of ex-combatants towards longer-term reintegration trajectories, emphasizing the ways in which young people are active peace builders and not just threats to peace building or actors who are perceived as needing to be bought off and who are expected to go away. They don't go away, and they have great ideas and contribute to peace in innovative and important ways. As a result, I wanted to emphasize political agency and social inclusion as important and also underemphasized aspects of post-war reintegration programs. As a result, that meant that notions of stigma and social exclusion really came to the fore as part of the original underlying research. Why are cyclists stigmatized? For lots of reasons, one of which is their involvement in roadside accidents and vigilante violence associated with roadside accidents, but in which they're also victims as well as perpetrators of that violence. The legacy of the sector is being originated by ex-combatants, and the perception that a significant proportion are still ex-combatants and therefore behave in ways that are said to be like ex-combatants. Because it involves young people, and young people are often stigmatized and excluded in societies, including my own in the UK or the US, perceived as drug addicted, perceived as troublemakers, perceived as criminal elements, or just up to no good. And because of specific involvement of motorcyclists in Liberia in cycles of mob violence over the last few years that are usually in response to police brutality directed against the cyclists, or in response to the ritual murder of cyclists by persons unknown, and cyclists believe that the police don't investigate those murders properly because their lives are perceived as being expendable, or they're perceived as being invisible. So I thought, rather than me keep talking about this, the best way that I could provide a context about stigma, about the project in general, was to show one of the short films that I've directed and produced as part of this project. This particular film is one that is not necessarily aimed at film festivals or at wider audiences, but instead is one that we, and by we I mean local partners in Liberia, Platform for Dialogue and Peace, a local NGO, and the Cyclists Federation, Labor Federation itself, as well as the cyclist researchers, that we thought that we would use in generating a series of dialogue groups with police and with community members themselves to bring issues about stigma and perceptions into the open and to start to challenge those. So this is a film that we did for that reason. So it's the best context I can hope for. It's 15 minutes and focuses on the disconnect between how cyclists are perceived and how they perceive themselves. A few things that you could maybe look out for: the lived effects of stigma and how those are painfully articulated, how notions of bad habits are extensive and carry over into everyday perceptions, even about modes of dress, hygiene, and behavior, about how stigma is not just about harmful words and perceptions, but how ongoing social marginalization really underpins and is used to rationalize violent police brutality, ritual murder of cyclists, employment discrimination, education discrimination, and everyday forms of passenger and societal abuse. And you'll see that stigma is also about the discursive violence of non-recognition. So specifically what it means to collective self-worth to have societal contributions remain invisible. And yet cyclist contributions are extensive and ought to be seen by policymakers and by society and coded by researchers as peace building. So we'll do that, and then after the film, I'll come back to return briefly to a few of the other impact generating activities that have come about as a result of this film and other work that we've done.
The rough rider, they call it city current, the bar rider are moved, then they go around. You don't see that good. That's what they say. When they show you that, they tell you see that good. My experience about them, they run too much. They can be on excessive speed. Sometimes they will run into the children. And sometimes they can see you on the sidewalk They come close to you when you talk to them. They will either curse you or talk to you.
But the general perception of many people that they are rape or children because of their comportment, the way they carry themselves, they are rough, they're violent, there are a lot of things that they do that is awful, but there's some progress that is being made.
A lot of the pimping kids, only few own their own bikes. They work for people. It's just something they do for ends meet. So they call that vulnerable employment. So you see, just from the term, you know that it's a form of employment that wouldn't benefit them because it describes how vulnerable it is what they're doing.
This sector is totally discriminated. It's not a make-up story. You meet any well-meaning Liberians that do not work with your guys, troubleshooters. I'm telling you.
When someone offends them, they do really brought to the police first. They take it law in their hands before the police can come. Yes, they don't take time to handle case. They just wait because they still have that violent ways in them.
I think those names, sometimes people call them suicide bomber. All right? What the reason they call them suicide bomber? Because some of them ride the motorbike, they don't care about their own lives. All right? Because the thing is endangering your own life. So as a result, they are not wearing safety materials to ride the motorbike. So when they ride, they are not focused. Some of the young people, I don't prefer to call them this way, but for this technique, because our country right now, people call them Zogos. All right? So there's Zogo that people who take drugs, people who go about, burglarizing people doors and things, and take it to a particular destination for sale. They get in contact with other people, but they are young people, but they are part of the society. But because they have to make their living, they have to work their own motorbike and to also make their living. But mind you now, some of them, they are hijacker also. They will hijack something for you, although they are riding motorbike, but they also bring their seriously.
Yeah, you had the good and the bad one. Sometimes they call them, I mean, that one is Zogo Rado. That one is a Zogo Rado. No, I get Rado, I love Zogo. What? Look at me looking at Zogo. It's like the Zogo Rado, those that take in hard substance. When you see them on the motorbike, sometimes you can just route them because there's no other means. You want to go where you want to go quick, and the only means available in front of you. But when you say to him, you will know that, yeah, this guy is a Zogo. That when you sit with somebody who you know, who looking for the money, you say, yeah, this guy is a very good guy. Like example on myself. I feel very proud about all my pride, even being old pride, any kinds of pride. When I sit on the street, I make my money.
No. Motorcyclists actually the what or more people saying that so Ex-Combatant riding motorbike. No. We got the PSC hold on and I more us that riding bikes. We got responsible people. We got married people. Because nothing doing so people ride motorbike. Anywhere you go, you find some disgruntled people. But the classifier ought to be so Ex-Combatant. We are not Ex-Combatant. And not everybody are Ex-Combatant. Like me, I fought war, of course, I fought war, but now I behave mature because I will honor the issue of my father dead. That one induced me to join the law forces. But after I realized my mistake, I came back to myself. And now I'm doing everything well for myself. Yeah, I harm nobody. Nobody harm me.
You really don't enjoy being called that way. So one of my meetings right in this chapel, I told them, but let's be very honest. That's what you've been displaying. You have not shown them that you are doing something and helping. So change your behavior, change your way you talk, in the way you engage the public, and people will see the change and withdraw the names to give you. So there are some people who still feel that they they have some negative influence in the society, but for the past 4 years, it's been clear that they have shown tremendous transformation of character and behavior to the people because of the kind of background counseling and seminars that we conduct all across the country.
I started to ride motorbike immediately I graduated from high school, 2008, taking into consideration that there was nothing else so far for me to do to have myself survive. Well, my parents said when I was riding back, like I said, I never had a belief that one day I would become a motorcyclist. But I always tell people, the only thing I can do, I can steal to get money. I don't kill to get money. I don't do anything that will affect me to get money. But once I ride motorbike, like I said, it is a stepping stone. No one to ride motorbike forever, but we always tell people that you can ride motorbike at least to get somewhere. You can start from there, and tomorrow, on God's grace, you can reach somewhere.
Cyclists are rude, they are people, they are actors, they are not good to be in society, and this, that, and marginalize them. So this sounds around, cyclists decided that it was anything goes wrong to retaliate right away because they don't give them judgment. But what really means the problem is a stigma. Like you were once a role, and then you left student, but then what will be carrying you is the stigma. I think that was affecting our society today. To address yourself to stigma, you have to have patience to explain to people who you are today. You are not someone that yesterday. You are being transformed.
Motorbike, it helped everybody. Like me, it helped me as I see myself. I'm a self-supporter. Although my parents help me, but they don't have the hand to do everything for me. And so I have to put myself in the motorbike field to know how to help myself, to be able to help myself. Yeah. When I ride back, the little money I have, I send myself to school, and I use it for daily activities.
Yeah, this is my era. This is where I run. Why did I start riding back? Because after high school, we don't have a job, and government don't provide job, and that's why, and we can't keep sitting without doing nothing. So that's why I decided riding back to be able to improve myself small. Because through the motorbike riding, I able to pay my rent, I eat, I clothe myself.
Something must be bad and something must be good for the cyclists. But for our community, I can see a lot of people within the community, how they live the two cycles. With all motorbike, I dare you, I swear to God, people will die from starvation here. But if I can ride back, I feed my family.
Some say the cyclists, they are smoker, they are jungle, you know. They say a lot of things about the cyclists in Toronto, but still, they will still come to us for help. And when I'm man that, he might be say a lot of things about our friend humans. So we don't take that one into consideration. We will still help them. They are our parents and they are our sisters.
Sometimes crimes take place, people say we are the one. There are criminals in this country who can't afford to even buy a car. And it is motorcycle that they can't buy. Some use their own money, they buy a motorcycle, they go to work and commit crimes. When those crimes have been traced by CID to know who committed them, if community people in those communities heard that it was motorcycle sound that night when the crime was being committed, so as the cyclist.
They're telling that you're not important in society. You are suicide bomber and non-living thing. But this time around, the story changed. Now they're calling the cyclists good guys.
The motorbike carry on. The motorbike bike then they carry on. They're the one we get charter to carry on. And they carry us safely, they bring us safely. So when you come to talk with me as a market county superintendent, Madam Kuma Barry, that this one I have to tell you. The motorbike that carry me to bring me, I thank God for that one. I cannot lie to them. You know what I mean? No accident with me.
Motorcyclists are very helpful to lead the business people. In another sense, when our people come from Monrovia and other parts of the country, they bring goods. We don't have wheelbarrow men here to haul the goods. These same motorbike people are the same people that will haul our goods here. We don't have access to car here, most especially during the rainy season. It's the same motorbike people that will help us to carry us and bring us back.
What are some of the names that people call the motorcyclists here?
For me, I wouldn't know that they be motorcyclists. I don't know whether they have other names for them.
I ride with them in ride boots almost every day. Yeah, a boot. Because when you're rushing to go somewhere, they can carry you quick.
Someone else again, when you trust them, someone if you know the street motorcyclist, you know that you get it on market or soon you say, oh, if you come in this side, you carry to so person, they carry when I reach. So before you do that, you know motorbike, you know the rally that you trust. So more often we get to our rally that we know get to a new rally that just coming.
Me, the one I said I bought and rap, but show me down when you tell me sorry, I don't hear myself. All right. Me, by the one I said you grew up plenty more than power.
So I had this chance. I went on a field visit and I was chance to meet with the leader in that area. And what he said to me then is what I can say to you. So he said, Pape, look, we sacrifice our lives to take these people from place to place. When difficult terrains, we go there. In the thick of the night, we go with them to places. And all they tell us is our arms, the stench of our armpits, how rude we are, how difficult we are. You can't respect people, who treat you this way. You cannot do that because every time there's trouble, they look to us. And the source of the trouble is us.
I'm looking forward to see one day motorcyclists will become minister, motorcyclists will become director, motorcyclists will become representative. The sector in general will be a big industry where we will be sending our people out for studies, come back and bring change to our country. This is what we're looking forward to see. And one day, this sector will be a very, very good sector that even if you are riding a bike, you will not regret why you rode back, or you would rather praise the essence of being a motorcyclist. So I want to believe that God will help us one day to achieve our dreams of transforming the sector and making it a vibrant one. This is what I look forward to seeing.
There are people here, they are good. There are people here who are working for themselves to aim something for themselves. There are some motorcyclists, they are very much serious, do everything through motorbike.
And now when we tell God, thank you, our motorcyclists, they are doing well. They can take us to places where we not able to walk and go. So they can give us that help there for us to bring our market from in the bush in Tubman by here. The good motor riders there, they are enough more than the bad one now. God be with them and God be with us. Let our leader take good control of our motorcycle.
All over in the society, they got bad ones and they got good ones. The pin motorcycle, they be a bad people. But it's the same motorcycle that they get on every day. For me, I'm not asking anybody about their past, whether they are ex-combatant, because that's not important now. The important is that everybody's going to move forward. So that's why everybody's looking up to. So I don't want to ask you whether you are ex-combatant or not. All we praise, we work as a team, and everybody achieve their goal. That's it.
Okay, I'll look to wrap up in about 5 minutes. The other things I want to say are, I guess, oops, pause that. No. Start from this slide. So I've been influenced by participatory action research methods, how we've conceived those, and also other things like narrative methodologies and feminist reflexivity. How we've looked to incorporate that with this project is through relational interviewing with as many people as possible, but a lot of follow-up interviews with key informants, fair reimbursement and compensation for people's time, addressing honestly, but also safely, ideas about naming practices that kind of work against academic orthodox understandings about anonymity that can sometimes work against acknowledgement, especially of people's own ideas about how they're contributors to peace. And especially this notion of pre-scoping. So learning from participants themselves what the priorities are, what the challenges are, and what the solutions that are already working might be. And then working with them to try to attract additional money to experiment or pilot test some of those solutions or gauge the impact of those solutions. So that led to a production of a short film series that's called Liberia, Legacies of Peace. Two of these films directly address motorcyclists and conflict-affected youth, Best Man Corner, which has had some success on the mid-range film festival circuit, which has been fun. And this film series has been funded by the Scottish Funding Council, and also Pink Panther, which deals with gender mainstreaming and efforts to involve and support women who want to be riders or who are already motorcyclists. And there are very few of them, only 10 in a sector of anywhere between 75,000 to 150,000 riders. And the film you just saw, which then are used in a series of counter-stigma activities, which we've also used participatory action methods to generate and to get funded. So the Scottish Funding Council supported us in a series of counter-stigma activities, included a bumper sticker campaign designed by cyclists themselves from across parking stations. And this slide shows a few examples of those bumper stickers. Radio broadcasts that were written and produced by the Labour Federation of Cyclists themselves on topics from the role that cyclists played during the Ebola crisis to how they're continuing to work in spreading awareness about coronavirus and to ride safely and prevent the spread of coronavirus, to ideas about social stigma and their contributions to politics, economy, and social inclusion. A series, and then the dialogue groups that I briefly discussed before that try to bring cyclists together with police to articulate grievances, one against the other, to also teach about road safety and even about fines for road safety, so that then other police can't extort the cyclists for more than what should be owed, and things like that. And the Swedish government has also recently awarded us additional funding to pilot test cyclist ideas about educational scholarships, notions that they have that when you give an educational scholarship to one person from a taxi rank, that the educational attainment of the whole rank goes up. So we're testing that, and business skills training to parking stations as a collective to see what impact that has on collective savings that the taxi ranks participate in. So that's all I prepared. Looking forward to any questions or discussion about any of those issues or topics. Anything on your mind?
Thanks, Jeremy. That's great. If anybody has got a question, if you can just stick your name in the chat, we can. Oh, great. Already, Michael, unmute and ask question.
Yeah, thank you very much for this. This was really interesting. So, my background is in transportation planning, and so I was, for example, just hit by a car yesterday out cycling. So I think about road safety a lot. I think about cycling a lot. But one of the things that struck me really interesting about this slate of countermeasures you talked about is this emphasis on identifying the value that cyclists provide in society. And, the bumper stickers I thought did a good job of being like, no, we're just people, right, that want respect as people. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the balance there between, convincing people that, cyclists are good, because they do all these things for society, versus just convincing people that we should respect other people because they're other people.
Yeah, I mean, that opens up a whole other set of literature, which is about stigma and what works. And there is a literature that suggests that counter-stigma measures don't work very effectively. The one way would be what you suggest. But I'd look at it more from the measure of what do the individuals think works and what do they want broadcast and what kind of messages are important to them. So I think then that already leads me down another path that then I'm never really going to be in the position to say, and also I'm not really a positivist social scientist. I'm more of, I'm more everything that's not that. So I'm not going to be doing like a control test about this other set of measures and trying to weigh up the value of one versus the other. Instead, it's about also understanding how processes of DDR themselves, programs that are designed as part of UN-led interventions often, are the things that are contributing to some of the perceptions in the first place. So that's a big part of how I come to this set of things. The other dilemma that I think you articulate or start to articulate is something that's always involved with counter-stigma efforts, which is that to counter stigma often involves naming it and kind of reifying it. So bringing it back into circulation to then dismantle it or counter it or come up with counter narratives about why that's not true or why that might be true of some people, but not all, or why that might be true of many people. But then there's also this other set of things that should be taken into consideration, the good attributes and the contributions weighed alongside of some of the challenges that are challenges. So in doing any of those three kind of paths towards counter stigma, you are invoking the very names that are creating the stigma in the first place. You're recalling that. So a lot of people, including going back to Irving Goffman and his pioneering work on stigma in sociology, is about how often counter stigma involves bringing people into the fold of quote unquote we normals, convincing we normals about the value of individuals. And that came across in the film a lot too, right? In terms of invocation of the work that we, the cyclists, have to do. We have to be perfect so that they respect us. We have to show society that we belong. So rather than fix the dilemma that you chart, I'd rather just problematize that further in all of the directions and what I just articulated. In terms of then what I hope to do is mainly, the people whose attitude I care about the most are my research participants and the people that I work closely with. And do these efforts correspond with their notions of peace building? And I think doing that is already doing a lot to alter ideas about bottom-up peace and to draw attention to forms of the everyday and its value in research and policy terms, in terms of the kinds of things that could be done to retool peace building from bottom-up forms of recognition.
Thanks, Jeremy. Pravina.
Thanks for your presentation. I am a 2020 Marshall Scholar, and I'm an incoming PhD student at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And so I'm really interested in your methods. So my current research engages a community-based participatory research method, and it merges like photo voice techniques with citizen science. And so my question is around participatory action research. I'm wondering, like, even within well-defined communities, people often have like significant differences in perspectives. And so I'm wondering, how do you find ways to capture, I guess twofold question. How do you find ways to capture all voices in the process and like honor outlier ideas and opinions? And then also, does your research sort of have people who have these rich lived experiences? Are they analyzing the data, or are they more just data collectors for you? How are they really logistically involved in deciding what happens with that information instead of like other experts taking that on?
Yeah, I like how you frame that last part, especially about not just trying to notions of expertise, honor alternative or up forms of expertise as equal and if anything as more valuable. So, I'm influenced by notions of situated knowledge, for example. But but how do you go beyond that as well? That it's not just about identifying, acknowledging the hierarchies of expertise exist, the dynamics of inclusion and exclusion exist, but about how do you do something more? So, you know, the way, and what you described in the first part of your question describes the cyclists very well. they're a much more heterogeneous population with contrasting ideas about who they are, where they come from, about the ambivalent status of ex-combatant youth alongside conflict-affected youth, but also alongside narratives about solidarity and the social benefits of riding together, which is a key part of the research. So what did we do with all of that? You know, my methods in terms of interviewing are influenced by Leanne Fuji and relational interviewing. So that really are anti-positivist in a lot of ways. So to approach the research encounter in a relational way is to look at it as something that itself produces knowledge and creates new expectations, creates new understandings, creates new relationships, and isn't just about collecting knowledge that already existed before that encounter. The encounter itself is critical in shaping the nature of the material that's produced. So I try to be sensitive to that in terms of writing up, in terms of every aspect of the research design process and data collection and data analysis process. From there, it's about listening and using the words of subjects and participants, and not going in with too many preconceptions. So what Veena Das, who has done excellent work on subjectivity and violence, calls going in with the gesture of waiting and allowing the knowledge of the other to mark you. So for example, a question about the socially integrative benefits of cycling undergoes a transformation process in the research itself, where that question formulated by me and my knowledge about DDR ultimately becomes writing together what you get. Something that corresponds to the language that cyclists themselves use to discuss amongst themselves what social reintegration means. So a notion of writing together rather than social integration. So listening and using and allowing the language of others to theorize. So an idea of theorizing with rather than after the fact or at a subject. Pre-scoping then that I briefly alluded to is critical to that. That is going in with a set of, here are our objectives, here's what we hope to achieve, here are questions that are on our mind. What do you think of these questions before we start to ask them, with a series of stakeholders at all different levels of the groups that we hope to target, and ensuring that that also is a mix of urban, rural, and semi-urban areas of men and women. Even though there are only 10 women, it's always integral for us to make sure that we're involving that perspective in everything we do. And in capturing the perspective of all the women who are invisible, who would like to enter the sector, but are not currently riding our obstacles. So that's always on our mind. And that's thanks also to excellent partners in Liberia who are trained in participatory action research methods. So the pre-scoping is then key to then identifying which questions haven't we asked. And it's really through that method that then a focus on solutions, which of course is also influenced by various academic ideas from Desserteau to Foucault to others, about, in other words, an expectation that something is already happening before I go into that space, and that the solution is not about me leveraging or scaling up. It's really about understanding, why is there a perception that something that is already working isn't recognized? What are the obstacles to that? What would you like? What are your ideas about what researchers and policymakers ought to be doing? So it's out of that all of those ideas come about, and then they're refined in a collaborative process. So we feed back to the participants constantly and across all levels. It's exhausting. It takes a lot of people. It takes actually a lot of money to conceptualize that, but only to a certain extent. Then these other things are actually incredibly cost effective, especially if we compare that to big money development projects. And what we are trying to persuade donors, including in the US and in Sweden, is that this approach does yield much better results and is ultimately more sustainable. And so trying to persuade them to shift ideas about what kinds of projects they're doing, especially around narratives of youth, women, gender mainstreaming, and security sector reform. So that's kind of how we do it. I hope that that kind of answers both of your questions. I could talk about it for another half hour, but sure.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've just been thinking a lot about is in the data analysis stage. I've been really pushed to think about what if I let go of some of the control I have as a researcher and actually engage citizen scientists in my genre of research in analysis instead of, just using grounded theory. So that's been, I've been pushing myself.
Let me like quickly drop something into the chat if I can, which is, my most recent publication that grapples with all of these issues. It's in the Review of International Studies, and it's really an article about, what does it mean to claim that you're doing this kind of research, and what does it mean to represent the voice of others or to incorporate that? What are the challenges? What are the pitfalls? What are the possibilities?
Nico, I think you have a question.
Yeah, hi, thanks for the talk. Really interesting stuff. So I do a lot of participatory action work here in New York across various sites relating to like juvenile justice systems and with young adults who are incarcerated. And some of the work we do, like in terms of out in the community, right, with families, kinship networks, and so on, we like try to focus on this idea of that conflict resolution is happening in a variety of different ways, and not all of them are have like bad or negative outcomes, right? So like oftentimes, there's this perception that conflict resolution in the community equates gun violence, right? So I guess my question, if like there's data on it and you can speak to it with the project, was how has it like sort of illuminated the spaces of like conflict resolution that don't involve like police officers, right, or other type of sort of formal structural or system actors that then come in and like resolve something, or if there's been issues with the riders and so on and so forth. And the reason I ask this question is, again, trying to move away from sort of like a framework that the only people that can solve problems or conflict are system actors, right, from the state, and not the folk who have to like live in their neighborhoods or get from point A to point B every day.
Yeah, amen to all of that. That's something, all the principles you articulated are ones that we try to center, especially in the police cyclist dialogue groups, for example. So, I'd start out by accepting all of your arguments and ideas and pointing to, I'd labeled these activities as counter stigma activities or social inclusion activities. Sometimes the language we use depends on audience, which is a key aspect of participatory action research too, is to be aware of diverse audiences, how diverse audiences have different interests that may not be aligned with your subjects and research participants' best interests. So how can you challenge those audiences, and how can you kind of break the usual notion that to be noticed requires scaling up and getting like the UN to notice and then do things differently. So it's starting from that acknowledgement that stuff is already happening that's working and working very effectively, and that excludes some of those actors. But acknowledging that sometimes to those actors who are doing that good stuff, they just need more money. So how can you embrace a development model that is more about direct cash payments to actors that are doing good things, rather than expecting that you're the one that has to then come in with your preset program. With the system actors themselves, with the police, it's really a lot of our work and a side project, well, that's actually become a huge project, which is regional in West Africa, and about borderland communities and youth as peacebuilding agents and actors in borderland communities. And they face a lot of police violence, both from regular police and from border police, including sexual and gender-based violence. is confronting the system actors and their perceptions of self as being peaceful. So something that obviously has a lot of resonance in abolitionist campaigns in New York and elsewhere. So highlighting the ways in which police are violent actors and engaged in forms of police brutality or other forms of violence. And we seek to do that in a way that doesn't ratchet up violence in the sessions. The Platform for Dialogue and Peace are very effective and trained in conflict mitigation, conflict resolution techniques and skills that I marvel at anytime I sit in and I just shut up and observe. And that is really trying to get border police and police to acknowledge the role that they play. In the same way that cyclists have been forced through, cycles of stigma and social exclusion to acknowledge how they feed into, but also oppose and resist the discourses about them. But then it also involves excluding those actors, only inviting those actors in sometimes. Those actors participate in some of the spaces and dialogue groups, but not all of them. And then the rest, it's clear that, including to the protagonists, to the actors themselves, that they are the focus and that we're focused on their ideas, only some of which involve, the police. But the police are a big part of it because they are such a part of the individuals that are enacting the violence against cyclists, including through non-action, but also police brutality, and including through the discursive violence against them. So that they're lawbreakers, that they're troublemakers. So it's kind of about also equipping the cyclists with that with some of the activist language sometimes, or just acknowledging that they already have that language and that's already happening, but maybe not always in a structured or formal way. That's often something that got fed back to me by the cyclists themselves. I'm conducting some of these interviews in a space that's literally called Motorcyclist Intellectual Forum. So is already a space that's conceptualized and designed to bring them together to articulate and manage problems that affect them. But that after I left, I'd still come back and hear back, one of the main benefits of your being here is just in the kinds of conversations that happen after you leave. So regardless of what you collect and report on, some of it's a convening function, but and an acknowledgement that convening was happening before you arrived, but just tweaked it a little bit more or gave an excuse to have a slightly more formal understanding. I think that those ideas are not foreign to kind of community activist notions either, in terms of the role you play and the humility that's required, and also the reflexivity and acknowledgement of positionality and power is also entailed.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Michael.
Hi, it's me, Michael, this time. And thanks for that. That's really fascinating. Just to give some context for my question. So I'm the incoming Marshall Scholar Fellow, and I work in tropical agriculture. So I don't have any really knowledge very much of social science research, but I will be working in Liberia though. And it'll be my first time there. And so my question comes from, it seemed like that a number of the motorcyclists were asking and talking about sort of like the importance of their work towards like transporting agricultural goods. And my understanding is that the agricultural landscape in Liberia is changing very quickly, and it's going to change really quickly over forthcoming decades. So I was just wondering if you've sort of picked up anything like in your interviews and whatnot as to how people are perceiving that change, how they think it's going to change the way that their work happens, and the way in which it could also affect sort of the way in which they're perceived.
Yeah, I'm not going to have anything that's going to like dramatically alter your own perceptions, especially since you're the expert. But the changes that they're aware of are the changes that oppressed populations are often aware of, about how the benefits of these swift and often environmentally devastating changes are not accruing to communities in which they're happening. And so a real questioning of development models that are geared around macroeconomic stability and neoliberal economics based on foreign direct investment as being some cure for the post-conflict ills that trouble conflict-affected populations. So they're acutely aware of the power dynamics involved and about how big development projects often exacerbate economic inequality, gender inequality, and environmental destruction because they're capital intensive rather than labor intensive. So you might be interested in one of the short films in the series that I pointed out. It's called Diamond Boys. It along with Best Man Corner, have probably been quote unquote the most successful in terms of the film festival circuit and ethnographically and in anthropological ethnographic film festivals. Diamond Boys has had an audience. I think because people are interested in some of these ideas. And Diamond Boys is just about two veteran miners, diamond miners, talking about a life in artisanal mining. And it's a subtle message, but it's there because I wanted the film to just be about what does it mean to reflect back on a life, and a life that's a conflict affected life. But one of those changes there is a preference for large scale capital intensive mining versus artisanal mining versus mining that is more environmentally friendly. So that's something that is happening or else not happening in Liberia, but probably should be. And there's literature on that I'd be happy to guide you towards if you want to email me. There's, you know, for Liberia specifically, it's really the move to palm oil, which is really environmentally devastating. And the movement away from rubber, which had its own problems and difficulties and conflict legacies, but was less environmentally devastating than palm oil, which is really in a lot of ways kind of scorched earth and really transforming the rural landscape in Liberia. So it's about how to resist that and how to deal with that. And part of the problem is often the lack of other viable opportunities. But cycling's addressing that because really it is the biggest economic success story in most post-conflict contexts in terms of youth employment that isn't recognized as such and that is generated by youth. To say nothing of then how they change the landscape, they connect communities. It's not super environmentally sustainable either as a mode of transportation, but better than cars, better than other things. But yeah, they've also just incidentally, you know, grown up also a mass employment system connected to them and what's called the task force. So in terms of dealing with the police, they try to have a self-policing organization that employs even more vulnerable young people or ex-combatants that are designated as policing them and designated being their advocates. So just a really fascinating whole employment generation network that I think ought to question kind of ideas about transport, ideas about employment generation, and ideas about sustainability.
Thank you. Palm oil is the crop I most work in, so that's really interesting to hear and everything. And I'm like super, I will be emailing you to find out more. That's fascinating. Thank you.
Cool.
We've got one last question from Katie.
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Katie, and I'm actually a student here in the School of IR at St. Andrews. So I'm in the Security Studies program. Yeah, and well, I'm actually like really interested in the concept of dialogue. More so, I'm studying it more from the perspective of like dialogue on like an online communication platforms like social media. But I was just kind of curious because through my research, I've read a lot about how it's far more than just, you know, speaking and listening. There's actually, you know, a spectrum of activities that could be considered dialogue, and the way that dialogue then can be achieved or whether it's ever achieved and how that influences policy is actually, I guess, influenced by this really, I guess, like under articulated behavior of dialogue. And so I was kind of wondering through any of your research, if you know, observed the emergence of dialogue and kind of how you would characterize it and how that then has influenced the peace building efforts. But I know it's a big question, so whatever you would want to engage with there. Yeah, thank you.
In 3 minutes or less. Yeah, also big. It's a shame that that we couldn't lure you over to our program that's starting next year on peace building and mediation. So the mediation side of that at St. Andrews will, of course, focus a lot about these different issues. I'm influenced by feminist methodologies that have long pointed out that that we need to pay attention when we talk about discourse to more than speech acts. So for embodied gestures, silences, and things that are still utterable and uttered, but not spoken. So that definitely influences me in how I look at narratives and discourses of peace and reintegration. But then, you know, I'm also come at some of this project a little bit differently, because we want to build on local practices, or quote unquote indigenous or community-based practices, which already come from a model that Liberians often refer to as a workshop. So that a workshop, or what we sometimes call dialogue group, has a certain format that that in some ways we're inheriting, and in some ways we are tweaking, and in other ways we want participants to tweak as it happens and unfolds, and to challenge. And so part of the ways in which we challenge that model, or hopefully add to it, is in articulating things that are, again, already happening. The bumper stickers, for example, are not an idea I came up with. They're an idea that the cyclists themselves had, and are already messaging in really interesting and provocative and political ways. And we wanted to use that method to provide a way, kind of a blank canvas, to broadcast additional messages that they wanted to broadcast. So that is something that is a non-spoken way of dialoguing with passengers that has unintended consequences. If we anticipated consequences, it was changing minds, changing hearts and minds, right? But a lot of them talk about the real tangible economic benefits of having a particular bumper sticker, of attracting passengers, of communicating directly with passengers to say, I'm safe, I'm this person. And that coincidentally comes up against some of my own notions about researchers. Something that I've always been repulsed by is, if you travel to any town in Liberia, or any of a number of post-conflict contexts where the UN has been involved, you first encounter a slew of billboards. It's like a wasteland of UNDP brings you this schoolhouse, UNICEF brings you this road, such branding that I think is a form of marking and is really troublesome. So I wanted the bumper stickers to literally be a blank canvas where St. Andrews is nowhere to be seen. But they pushed back about that. And they said that incorporating certain logos also, whether I like it or not, affords an idea of status, affords an idea of an external recognition of a role that they're playing. So, and I liked that they would confront me about my own hypocrisy, that on one hand, I'm hoping to broadcast these counter stigma messages to the UN and to others, change ideas about recognition and non-recognition, but I don't want to recognize in ways they wish to also advertise this relationship that they have with me, that they want to leverage and use that relationship with St. Andrews, for example, or with the NGOs or the Labor Federation to broadcast that. But beyond that, then within speaking, there are microdynamics too that I won't get into because we're out of time. But of course, that was always already a part of the workshop model that existed. It is about articulating grievances, both sides, and listening, but also using the space as a space of teaching and learning. So almost like a classroom to learn about work safety or about fines, or but then also to teach. So kind of like a teach-in model. So not just a dialogue group, but kind of a classic teach-in that is conscientiousization in Paulo Freire's sense for the cyclists being in that space, but also a form of direct teaching, cyclist to police or police to cyclist.
Thank you. I found that like really interesting, and especially the piece about the branding, because I've had like a similar problem with actually studying like policymakers online, especially like diplomats and foreign ministers, and studying their behavior on social media. And one thing I've noticed is actually like the verification label, like they have verified accounts. And I think that influences the nature of the engagement in the dialogue, if you consider it dialogue that emerges. And so I guess it's something kind of almost similar to when
that really influences our naming practices. So with film, you kind of have to name, you're showing, so in a way you have to name. So that already comes into conflict with academic anonymization practices, but it also produces dialogue about that very thing, about differences in who gets to own ideas and who gets status as speaking for and on behalf of different ideas. And our own academic practices in the name of vulnerability are often erasing or failing to acknowledge where ideas come from and who has them and what's happening to them.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's a fascinating talk. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Jeremy. That was really, really interesting. And I think we all learned a great deal. And I would also say to everybody that's here, if you want to see some of the work that Jeremy's done in the US as well, there's an amazing film he's done called Silkies, which I picked up from one of his Facebook posts and really, really engaged with that film. So do check that out as well, because I think it's an amazing piece, especially Katie, you're military, so it may really interest you.
Here's Silkies, by the way.
yeah. You know, I'll promote it. You link it.
There you go.
But yeah, thank you very much, Jeremy, for everything today. And sorry, I'm just going to post this to everyone. For some reason, it's set up in a strange chat way. But thank you very much, Jeremy. That was really, really interesting, and I think, you know, challenging and great. Actually, it was interesting to have different people doing different kinds of research, all asking questions about your methods, so in different areas. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you everybody for coming today. I'm hoping there will be one next week. It won't be Wednesday because we're actually having our Marshall dinner next Wednesday, our first in-person event in 18 months. So that's quite an exciting thing to be doing. But there may be one on Tuesday. I'm just waiting for the person who's offered to do it to confirm with me. So thank you, everybody. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your days or evenings. The sun is out in the UK, which is a rarity at the moment. So thanks a lot, Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks again.